Hi there, I'm Parle Patel, joined by the lovely BISHI at the Queen's House, National Maritime Museum in Greenwich. So BISHI, so good to be joined by you again. We would love to hear more about your amazing Reflektions project that you actually projected onto the Queen's House. Could you tell me a little bit more about this whole installation?
Thank you so much. It's really lovely to be back here. And Reflektions is a music audiovisual piece around 9 minutes long. It was originally commissioned for Coventry City of Culture. And it's a piece about how creativity is the universal force of the world. And it's centered around a very important quote in the Bhagavad Gita. And when I initially was commissioned to create this piece, it was very difficult because we were still under tight COVID regulations and lockdown was only lifting, and there was a lot of nervousness around how everything was going to go and sort of play out in Coventry. And I'm really interested in the musical history of Coventry. So, obviously movements like two-tone, but obviously it's also the birthplace of Delia Derbyshire, who's considered the mother of electronic music. Or one of the main mothers of electronic music. And Coventry Cathedral was built after the Second World War, and it's where Britain premiered the War Requiem. So there's a lot of musical history there. And I eventually landed an interview with the punk and new wave singer called Hazel O'Connor, who was born in Coventry. And we both have a shared experience in working with Bowie's record producer, Tony Visconti. So that really kind of bonded us. And throughout this 3-hour epic FaceTime conversation that we had, she ended up picking up the Bhagavad Gita and reading this beautiful passage. And I just knew that, like the penny dropped, and I found the nucleus of the piece, which is so nice when you're creating things. You can, sometimes during the creative process, it's hard to know what the actual center is. So she really provided that, and very beautifully read it, and it's the nucleus and the beating heart of the piece. And in Coventry, they wanted an entire projection piece all across Coventry, the canal, which is kind of a back-ended canal. The canal was also the set of the Specials' first ever record album outside a historic music venue called the Tin Hat or the Tin Cup, one of those things. And so it just felt like very loaded with history, and we had a few different ideas about projections and projection techniques, and in the end, we had 5 screens that kind of reflected back into the water. So we had this truly we brought Coventry into the future, hopefully.
Yeah, and there was a historical link with electronic music in Coventry, which must have been important for you as well, right? Because you've done so much with electronic music. Bringing it back to the Queen's House, what was the significance, or what did it mean to you to have this amazing project being showcased here at the Queen's House?
Well, what initially interested me is I've experimented with several different types of projection and performance, but I'd never actually done a projection on a building. And there's a historical relevance with being at the Queen's House, because this is the building that was first built, and everything around Greenwich as we know it now was built around the Queen's House. So, Queen Henrietta Maria, she wanted a full view of the Thames, and so the backdrop of the Old Royal Naval College was built in its image, and obviously with the royal docks and all of the I guess like the birth of colonialism in many ways. It all feels very symbolic that the first artist to ever have a piece projected onto the Old Queen's House and the entire Royal Naval College in one is a daughter of immigrants. And there's a very famous quote, which I'm going to reference on my phone here, from the Sri Lankan writer Ambalavana Shivanandan. And he's known for his great aphorism that we are here because you were there. And so the opportunity, it's featured very prominently in Satnam Sangira's Empireland, which I read during the big heat wave last summer. And that was just like a bomb that went off inside of me. And I felt like the symbolism of me being the first person in the history of kind of Greenwich UNESCO World Heritage Site to have their work projected in that way. It was a very full circle moment, and really symbolic and deep for all kinds of reasons. And actually very, very deep that I believe between 9,000 and 10,000 people came to the Diwali celebrations. So it really shows that actually community does want to come together, and people do want to learn about things, and they do want to feel a part of things. And so that all felt really significant to me.
And, you know, this brings me on to the next question really well. What is the importance of your work as a South Asian female as well in everything that you're doing? Why is it so important?
Yeah, well, in the arts and in culture, we're at a very interesting turning point where we're having a lot of discussions around, you know, race, class, gender, imperialism. We're going into our roots. We're kind of excavating our history. We're looking at the dark history of things, and it's definitely bringing up, you know, it's like a big psychological plate that's spinning. And when you go back and you analyze the past, of course, a lot of very dark things are going to be unearthed and exposed. But we're also in a moment where people are trying to come to grips with things, and there's a lot of light that comes with the dark that gets excavated. But one of the things that I find in, you know, music production, technology, is there's been a real revolution for women and gender minorities, but the investment is still seriously lacking. So the internet and social media and the acceleration of technology has given us the ability to be able to say and do things that were completely unimaginable to previous generations because the technological developments just weren't there. But with that, you need to have the real world investment to be able to elevate everybody.
Yeah, this is bringing me on to my next point.
Yeah.
Not only are you an incredible artist, a musician, you have also founded something called Which.
Yes.
Could you talk about that as well? Because that,
yeah.
you know, that ties in nicely with what you were just talking about.
Sure. Well, Which is the Women in Technology Creative Industries Hub. And I've been running it for about 5 years, and I've done real life festivals, online festivals, podcast interviews, symposiums. I've done events in places like the Tate Modern, and I've interviewed a range of guests from the likes of Laurie Anderson, Imogen Heap, Anna Meredith, Hannah Peel, Wanda Obize. And I think it's really important to culturally translate the journeys that people go with their music and with technology, because people expand and they grow and they evolve, you know, and I think they evolve if they really want to as well, you know. But I just realized there were so many amazing women and gender minorities whose stories were just not being celebrated and not being spoken about. So this is my way of being able to create some kind of change, you know, which has commissioned artists like Hinako Omori, Leah Mice, people that, you know, have gone on to start to do really significant things. And there's a real need for these spaces where we talk about people from different racial backgrounds or different gender minorities. I think class is really entering the conversation more, and rightfully so, because, you know, living standards have really changed. It's a very different environment than, you know, that I came up in a very early social media age, and now everything is changing and accelerating at such a rapid speed. people still need they need more than ever a certain kind of platforming and a certain kind of development, which seems to be getting scarcer and scarcer. And now, over the last year or so, it's really changed with AI, the movement of women in music production and women in technology has really shifted. And now we're into Web3, and that's bringing up all kinds of other artistic and ethical conversations. But there still needs to be space for, most women and gender minorities are independent practitioners, and we need these networks in order to be able to push each other forward. So I'm still, for me, I'm mostly interested culturally, and I'm interested in just completely curious about other people's stories and their process.
Amazing. Coming back to the Reflektions project, I got to see it. It was amazing. 9 minutes of sheer creativity and just bliss. It was just beautiful to watch. What are some of the challenges you faced whilst, creating this project? You did say that the seeds were sort of planted during the lockdown period, which was, of course, a challenge. But, what are some of the practical challenges that you had? Because it's a mammoth task, right? Projecting something so beautiful and quite intricate, actually, because it's all timed and the rest of that. What are some of the challenges that you had in the project in that sense?
Well, mostly technological challenges in terms of we didn't really know screen sizes and ratios and screen ratios, kind of dot matrix sizes. I think COVID and I think definitely Brexit impacted that. And I think, the people at Coventry worked so hard, but, people were stretched in different angles. It's trying to put on a really ambitious outdoor festival in the middle of winter, kind of at the tail end of a pandemic. And I think they're going, I had 2 weeks to write the actual music and that was it. And sometimes you need these constraints, that the constraints and the deadlines and the scarcity is what informs the creativity very often. And I think it was more just like really boring technical stuff. That's one thing to remember with all art making and all creativity is that there's just a lot of very boring admin, and nobody gets away from the boring administration. And
I think people see the front end, right? And then they sort of don't really know the back end and all the mundane sort of stuff that you have to get through to sort of see the beautiful product at the end, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that's another really interesting era about the social media age that we're in now, where people really want to see what's behind. They want to see what's real. They want to see things which are quite unfiltered and quite unvarnished. And I wonder if it's because we've had such a prolonged age of this kind of false perfection. But even I think the screens had to be lodged into the canal water. So finding people who were trained to actually lodge them in the water so they come up at a certain angle. Even things like that were really hard. And I'm very conscientious about the production process as a whole. I'm completely hands-on with it, which I really like to be. But during the test, there was some pretty pissed off divers giving me evils and stuff. It's it's not me, I did try.
You never know, right, when you take on an ambitious project where it's going to take you and what you're going to have to do. You are what I like to think of as a musical pioneer, right? You have taken something that is so historically South Asian, the sitar, and reinvented it in your new electronic way. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, and what it means to you, and technologically what it required?
Sure. Well, when I was training in India, in Delhi, under Gaurav Muzumdar, who's one of Ravi Shankar's senior disciples, and there was a big pressure on me to be a virtuoso classical sitarist, which I would have chosen if that was the right path. But I was also DJing on the queer scene 2 or 3 nights a week. I was at Central St Martin's at art school, and I just couldn't I couldn't contain essentially sitting in a room for 8 or 9 hours a day for, they were just like, oh, but it will only take like 2 or 3 years. And I was trying to explain to them that, when you're 19 and you're like, say goodbye to this really exciting world and just sit in a room and practice, it's just like, no one's going to go for it. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That's a really, really important period of your life. And there was something called a studio sitar, and a studio sitar is half the size without the gourd at the end. And it was really made for people to practice on the road. And everyone just thought this was a massive joke, and people were laughing, oh, it's just like a toy, it's so ugly, blah, blah, blah. But I loved it, and I wrote most of my debut record with using that and singing, and with the sound engineer who was working with an Icelandic band called Sigur Rós. She taught me about these particular pickup microphones, and we drilled holes into the back of the sitar to make it more like a guitar. And there was real technical challenges at that time because, Ableton Live hadn't quite entered into the picture, and there was just like hideous feedback and, but I've since stuck with it, Ableton has come into the picture for home producers, and I've now started using MIDI triggers and MIDI pedals to program in different effects and things. And, I've also, over lockdown, I started collecting a lot of different pedals and stuff. So I think, I'll be definitely going into pedal boards and, just looking at the pedals that Ed from Radiohead, or just spying on people on Instagram to see what pedals they use.
Yeah.
So now I've begun to really delve into doing live sound design with Max for Pro. So Max is it's a program within Ableton, which is a bit more nerdy and where you get to kind of first-hand design kind of program effects and kind of design banks of things. So I'm moving into that territory so that it can become kind of even more atmospheric and epic. So I'm really there again, the technological changes have really changed everything. But I think we were talking earlier, also it caused a lot of moral issues,
Yeah, I was just going to come on to that. The fact that the Asian or Hindustani sort of classical world can be very rigid.
Yeah.
Right? So breaking away from that, and like you said, you were sort of ridiculed almost for being interested in this little travel sitar, as you sort of said it was. How did you overcome that? What made you go on? And more importantly, why?
Well, in Hindustani classical music, they see the voice as the highest form of expression. So instrumentalists are also just incredible singers. And you have tal and you have shur, which I say in that way because I'm Bengali. But
good for you.
Thank you.
I got it straight away.
Yeah. Oh no, people were reading me on TikTok about that. Anyway, so you have to learn how to rap the rhythms. And it's incredible, their dexterity, their speed, this kind of rap speech, essentially. And they can roll their tongues and make all kinds of sounds. So the voice is the highest form of composition and melody making. And I see what I'm doing with the sitar as the extension of my voice. So when people look down on me because they don't think, that I've gone down the non-traditional, non-virtuoso route. It's well, ultimately, I'm a singer and this is an extension of my voice, and aside from the fact that I love playing it and I love the sound and it's such an intrinsic part of my being and my writing, and kind of who I am now. And I think just doing it more has helped. I mean, yeah, I felt super self-conscious for years. I felt really looked down on. I felt really ostracized and really othered. I think that's a big part of what all South Asians, you know, people who are the children of immigrants or immigrant people go through, of that, you know, you are no longer viewed as a part of either culture. And for a long time, that was like a crucifix.
Nor there or here, right?
Yeah. It felt like being crucified. And then that changed into like being at the center of a compass. And that's been a big shift in my understanding of who I am. And, you know, I've met younger creators and they're in what I can describe as the crucifixion stage, where they're being told like, you need to be this or you need to be that, or you're not enough of this or you're not enough of that. It's very confusing. It's very upsetting. And then you go into compass phase, which is like, no, I am the world, actually.
You know, vocally, you're very unique. And do you feel that that is what sort of drove you to sort of, you know, like you said that the instruments that you play are an extension of your voice, right? They're an accompaniment. And do you feel that that is what sort of inspired you to, like, you know, experiment and add technological sort of advances and things like that into traditional instruments?
Yeah, I think, you know, as a teenager, there were people like Bjork, there was Radiohead, you know, Missy Elliott and Timbaland. I was slightly too young for the Asian underground, but I was very aware of, you know, I was just more annoyed that I couldn't join in because I was just too young. I think with, you know, jungle music, I think even like, although Britpop gets a really bad rap, there was all, the charts were filled with really exciting people, you know, Massive Attack, Tricky, these people who were thinking outside of the world, you know, Aphex Twin, you know, the early Aphex Twin raves I went to, it's just completely life-changing. And these were people who were not contained in their musical thinking. A lot of them were untrained, which I have a great respect for the untrained musician, because they tend to be a lot more fearless in many aspects. They are fearless. And I think I listened to a great interview with FKA Twigs, and she really nailed it. She's into world builders. So the David Bowies of the world, the Grace Jones, the Bjorks, even someone like, I mean, Damon Albarn is a universe builder, really. But people who build worlds, like MIA is a world builder as well. It's her vision, it's her lyrics, it's the politics, it's the way things are produced, it's who she works with. That's what really inspires me. And that was, when I was coming up, it's like, you know, too many clothes, too many opinions, too many things that you do. And it's the smartphone, loath as I am to admit that, it's understanding that actually things have this relationship that, like, that has really changed. And that's one of the great things about the current crop of content creators is, in a way, the onus has gone so far on the person to now they have to be a video editor and a sound editor and all of this stuff because of the way the technology has gone. But yeah, not that long ago, you were really pressed hard for it and really made to feel awful. And I think that is shifting or has shifted greatly.
So talking about shift, do you think that traditional world of Asian classical music, Hindustani classical music, is that beginning to change? Do you think when people like yourself have done really unusual and original things, do you think that is contributing to like a greater change that's happening? Or do you feel like, no, the rigidity is still there?
I definitely think in certain corners of India, the rigidity, you know, the absolute tradition will be there and should be there, you know.
That's good to acknowledge, isn't it? It should be there.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that way is always going to be right for certain people. But obviously India's changed in both of our lifetimes. It's such an exciting place. You know, I'm actually more interested in Vice India, and I subscribe to the Juggernaut, and it's just this joy of stories. Yeah. You know, like the other week I was reading a story all about like the Bengalis of Harlem and how Malcolm X would meet up with the Bengalis because he wanted Roshogolla. You know, he'd go for really traditional Bengali decisions, and they loved him.
Painted a picture of Rasgulla in my head now.
Yeah, yeah. But to think like, no, like Malcolm X wanted that. And there was a Bengali union in Harlem that did a lot of work alongside the Black Panthers, or there was a lot of consciousness. And you're like, these are the stories that we need, you know, and it's a modern India who are going in and like, that's what I mean about the like excavation of like, you get the dark side and then you get the light, which is all of these relationships. And it was explained why a lot of Bengali people ended up in Harlem in the first place. And it was, you know, I think a lot of them got passed off as being Mexican. It's just so interesting, so interesting. So, you know, there's so many shifts going on, and it's like, even I look at content creators, I look at, you know, I've worked with the designer Manish Arora for a huge number of years. You know, he was the first South Asian to ever get onto the official Paris fashion schedule. He really was the first. And, you know, obviously queerness has exploded. All of this stuff has exploded. And like, I love it. I really love it. So there have been tons of shifts, but, you know, as we've acknowledged, there's still a lot of structural work to do. But it's exciting. Things keep moving forward. Like that amazing designer who created Sam Smith's blow up look for the Brits. I mean, I love it. You know. You've sort of Harry's his name.
You've answered the question really well with what you've just said. There was probably a time in this country where you couldn't imagine there being a light projection with, you know, Eastern philosophical ideas that sort of are the seeds being projected onto the Queen's house. Yet they're happening now. Yeah. So it is a time of great shift and change.
Absolutely,
but there's a long way to go.
Absolutely, and I think now, you know, my work is expanding and enriching into other spaces, which feels amazing. But, you know, I love doing a lot of mentoring and listening to people and saying to them, look, it's okay, you just have to carry on making work. I never thought I was capable of any of this. When I first started, I just...
So what would your advice be to someone that is doing, wants a career in the creative sector and is sort of doing really unusual things, really original things?
Yeah. Well, so I think you need to keep making work, and you need to keep expanding your community. Like, so many of the relationships, creative relationships I have now, they're long-standing. They're people that I've known for 10, 15 years. And then just keep yourself open to new people, new ideas, new perspectives. And that's where the internet and social media is a phenomenal tool. And keep making and keep learning and keep building your village. It takes a village to create these projects. And on that note, I just want to shout out the artist Jonathan Hogg, who designed the visuals. I want to shout out to Douglas Green, whose incredible lighting display all along the Old Royal Naval College just took it to the next level. You know, I want to shout out to the musicians Alexandra Hamilton-Ayres and Anna Phoebe, who played piano and violin respectively, to my co-producer Richard Norris, Richard Norris was in a band called The Grid, who had a massive hit called Swamp Thing when I was a kid. So, and I would have listened to all of these early rave tunes as I was training in Hindustani vocal music as a child. So what would happen is the lessons happened in this auntie's house.
As they do.
They do. completely like auntified. So I would have my lesson, then I would watch the chart show whilst my mum was having a lesson, and the auntie's Gita Mashi, whose house it was in, she would give me like a Victoria sponge. So I'd just be eating it and like bouncing up and down on the sofa, watching all of these tunes and watching all of these videos. So that's a really nice full circle moment as well.
You're almost destined to do what you're doing, right? It started from that young age while you're learning one style, but you're being exposed to another. So you're learning about the other one as well. And it is absolutely who you are, isn't it? In your DNA.
And every melody in the Reflektions project can be played back on the sitar. So, and
that's an interesting fact.
Yeah, and that was quite subliminal. I wasn't really thinking. I just sort of wrote the piece as it went, and then I realised, oh yeah, every single one of these parts, because I got it notated and scored. So every part in the score can be translated back onto an Indian instrument. That might be a really nice project to actually have, like they have orchestras in India, so to get them to do their version of it with the visuals. Yeah. Just putting that out there.
Commission it.
Yeah, I know.
Well, Bishi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've really, really lovely, eloquently put across your reflections on your project, Reflektions, which of course was projected here at the Queen's House, the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich.